In a race that polls suggest has tightened to within the margin of error, both candidates are reaching across the aisle for support. In August, Ted Cruz got the support of Democrat Harris County District Attorney Kim Ogg, and he has touted endorsements from Democratic leaders in the Valley. Now, this week, his Democrat challenger, Colin Allred, is launching his Republicans for Allred effort, co-chaired by a former congressman from Illinois who now lives in Texas, Adam Kinzinger.
I've always respected him. So we worked together in Congress. I think we figured out over 400 pieces of legislation we were on together. Colin was always just a really good bipartisan member of Congress. So there were good relationships. But when January 6th happened, to me, that became my single focus, is the protection of democracy. And, Colin's on the floor of the House, actually ready to defend the House physically, which I never thought I would ever say those words. And, now that I'm a Texan, now that I live in Texas, looking at Ted Cruz, who ran and hid in a supply closet, who was part of the reason that January 6th happened, he lit the flame, he lit the match. He's a complete charlatan. To me, there's no comparison between somebody like Colin Allred, who truly loves Texas, truly loves the country, and is willing to do the hard work, versus Ted Cruz, who truly loves himself, and that's about it.
That's been part of your message, I guess, too, right?
Well, it has, and listen, I just want to say that Adam's a friend. We served on the Foreign Affairs Committee together, and it was interesting going back and seeing our records before all this, and knowing that when you have 400 pieces of legislation together, that means that you're probably aligned on a whole lot of things. And this is what I want Texans all across our state to know, is that if you're a principled conservative like Adam, you're somebody who believes in the Constitution, if you believe in our role in the world, if you believe that we should respect the results of elections, which is a fundamental principle of our democracy, then you should be a part of our coalition. And that I want to serve you, I want you to be part of this effort, and that we can do better than Ted Cruz.
And I want you to think about, this used to be normal to say, well, we agree on foreign policy. We agree that Russia is a threat to the United States and we should support Ukraine. We agree that Israel has a right to defend itself. But there's something that's happened in my party in the last few years where all of a sudden Russia is now seen as an ally, or at least somebody that we're too scared to stand up to, despite having lost 600,000 people and taken almost no territory in Ukraine. And so it shouldn't be a surprise that we had such a similar viewpoint on foreign policy, but we do. And now, unfortunately, that is rare. And so if you're a Republican that truly believes that America's role in the world is important, it's essential, you're willing to say, yeah, I can disagree with people on some things, but America to me matters more than the GOP or even the Democratic Party. I believe in this country. You got to join Colin Allred in this Senate race, because he absolutely believes that and Ted Cruz doesn't.
So who is it actually that you're hoping listens to this bipartisan message, or this moderate message? Because the Republican Party that may have existed, led by Texans 20 years ago, doesn't really exist anymore, does it?
Yeah, well, I'm a fourth-generation Texan. I grew up in Dallas. I went to Baylor. I know exactly who we are. I know there are a lot of Texans out there who feel like, listen, I was a supporter of George W. Bush, but I don't see myself reflected in this version of the Republican Party, or I'm a Reagan Republican, or whatever the case may be. And I want them to know that not only do I want them to be part of this campaign, but I want their voices to be heard, because I think that's the coalition of folks that we have to have, not only to win this election, but also to bring our country and our state back together.
And I'll say, look, if you think the Republican Party still has a vestige of Ronald Reagan left in it, it doesn't. Actually, if you look at Ted Cruz, who he is, versus Colin Allred, and you want Ronald Reagan, this is probably your best bet, because he believes that America has an important role in this world. He actually talks about the importance of working together. He understands that freedom is not something that is passed on the bloodline. You have to basically earn it and educate from generation to generation. So I look at that and say, look, Republicans, I think, look, if this is the Republican Party, probably this percent is going to vote for Ted Cruz and Trump no matter what. There's a big chunk that's knee-jerk reaction is to vote that way, but they feel very uncomfortable about it. These are the people who we're talking to. Those that really believe in Republican ideals, but Republican ideals not as they exist today, which is nationalistic, divisive, but as we remember them. And by the way, only when that GOP loses can you actually rebuild the old GOP of Ronald Reagan.
You think people will listen to this? Does this matter, reaching across the aisle, getting endorsements from those who would otherwise endorse someone of their own party?
I've always respected the voters, and I respect Texans. And I think they're paying attention. And I think they're looking at every single thing, trying to make a determination about who they think will look after them and their family and their values. And so I think it's important that they know that I'm the most bipartisan Texan in Congress, that I've worked in a way that's gotten me awards for my bipartisanship, that we're running a campaign based on building a big coalition. And that's all going to be a reflection of how I'll serve in the Senate as well. Whereas in Ted Cruz, we've had somebody who's been an extremist for over a decade. He's been there forever, only looking out for himself, and also, to Adam's point, undermining some of the most traditional values that I think we share as Texans, regardless of party, and putting them at fundamental risk. And that's why it's so important that folks get involved with this campaign, but also that we show that we're going to go in a different direction.
I think it matters too. I mean, look, so Ted Cruz all of a sudden is pretty quiet when it comes to abortion because he thinks that's a state issue, but he's happy to chime in on every other issue that is the culture war issue of the day that Ted Cruz basically launched in the first place. So he very conveniently likes to waffle between that's a state issue or that's a federal issue, depending on what it does to stir up his base. He uses anger, he uses division, he uses fear. That's what he does every election cycle to win, uses fear, division, and anger. And if you're a Republican that's sitting here just tired of that, like, you know, you just feel like your engine's been on redline long enough and this country is actually better than we're talking about it being, then Colin's your guy. And look, I'm not expecting that 50% of Republicans are all of a sudden going to vote for Colin Allred. It's really hard to change your political affiliation. That's your identity. But I think there's a lot of people in the GOP, because I talk to them, that are embarrassed by Ted Cruz. And they're like, yeah, look, you don't have to put out a Colin Allred sign in your yard, but nobody's going to be watching when you go vote that day. And he's somebody you can be proud of, and we can put the Ted Cruz nightmare to bed for a while.